The morning of August 15th started like any other day in the wealthy Riverside Hills neighborhood. Washington had been working as a housekeeper for the family for nearly 12 years. At 53 years old, she had seen many changes in the grand mansion that overlooked the valley below. She had watched young Timothy grow from a curious 5-year-old into a bright 17-year-old who was preparing for his senior year of high school. Arrived at the estate at 6:30 in the morning, just as she had every weekday for over a decade. The massive iron gate swung open automatically as her old Civic approached. She drove slowly up the winding driveway, admiring the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched across the 20-acre property. The mansion itself was a testament to wealth and success. 4 stories of pristine white stone, with tall windows that caught the morning light and cast rainbows across the marble steps. Richard had built his fortune in technology, starting with a small software company in his garage 30 years ago. Now, at 55, he was worth over $2 billion, and his company employed thousands of people worldwide. His wife came from old money. Her family had owned textile mills for generations. Together, they had created a life of luxury that most people could only dream of, but knew that all the money in the world couldn't buy the most important things. She had raised 5 children of her own in a small apartment across town, working multiple jobs to put food on the table and clothes on their backs. Now all of her children were grown and successful in their own right: 2 teachers, a nurse, a mechanic, and a social worker. She was proud of what they had accomplished despite their humble beginnings. The family had always treated with respect and kindness. Unlike some of the other wealthy families in the neighborhood, they never looked down on her or made her feel invisible. Timothy, especially, had always been friendly and polite. He would often sit in the kitchen while she prepared meals, telling her about school or asking about her own children. She had become like a second mother to him, especially since his parents traveled frequently for business. On this particular morning, noticed that Timothy's car was still in the driveway. Usually, he left early for his summer job at a local animal shelter. She made a mental note to check on him later, thinking he might be feeling unwell. She used her key to enter through the service entrance and immediately began her daily routine. The mansion had 35 rooms, including 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, a library, a game room, a home theater, and a full gymnasium. Its responsibilities included cleaning all the common areas, doing laundry, preparing meals when the family was home, and maintaining the guest quarters. It was a big job, but she took pride in her work and had developed an efficient system over the years. She started in the kitchen, a massive space with marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a center island larger than most people's entire kitchens. As she prepared coffee and began planning the day's meals, she heard music coming from Timothy's room on the 3rd floor. It was unusual for him to be playing music so loudly so early in the morning, but she figured he was just excited about something. Had left for a business trip to Europe the previous evening, and Richard was at his office by 5:30, as was his custom. The house felt different when they were away, larger, somehow, and quieter despite Timothy's music. Had become accustomed to these periods when she was essentially running the household on her own. As she worked through the morning, cleaning the formal dining room and the living areas, began to smell something unusual. At first, she thought it might be the gardeners burning leaves or brush somewhere on the property. The smell grew stronger as the morning progressed, and she began to feel concerned. She had an excellent sense of smell, a skill that had served her well over the years in detecting everything from gas leaks to spoiled food. By 10:30, the smell had become unmistakable. It was smoke, and it was coming from inside the house. Dropped her cleaning supplies and began searching for the source. She checked the kitchen thoroughly, making sure all the appliances were functioning properly. She looked in the basement, where the heating and electrical systems were located. Everything seemed normal. The music from Timothy's room was still playing, but now was genuinely worried. She climbed the grand staircase to the 2nd floor, then continued up the narrower stairs to the 3rd floor where Timothy's bedroom was located. The smell of smoke was much stronger here, and she could see a thin haze hanging in the hallway. "Timothy," she called out, knocking firmly on his bedroom door. "Timothy, honey, are you all right?" There was no response. The music continued playing, some kind of heavy rock music that Timothy enjoyed, but that found too loud and aggressive. She tried the door handle and found it unlocked. When she opened the door, her heart stopped. The room was filled with smoke, and flames were beginning to spread across one wall. Timothy was lying on his bed, unconscious, apparently overcome by smoke inhalation. Without hesitation, rushed into the room, covering her nose and mouth with her shirt. She shook Timothy's shoulder, calling his name, but he didn't respond. Her first instinct was to get Timothy out of the room, but he was 6 feet tall and weighed nearly 200 pounds, far too heavy for her to carry. Instead, she ran to the phone in the hallway and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's a fire at the estate on Riverside Drive, said, trying to keep her voice calm despite her panic. The house is on fire and there's a boy trapped inside. Please send help immediately. Ma'am, I need you to give me the exact address. Provided the address and answered the dispatcher's questions as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the smoke was getting thicker, and she could hear the fire crackling and spreading in Timothy's room. The fire department is on the way, the dispatcher assured her. Are you in a safe location? I'm trying to help the boy, replied. He's unconscious in the room with the fire. Ma'am, I need you to get out of the house immediately. The firefighters will handle the rescue when they arrive. But couldn't just leave Timothy. She went back into his room, staying low to avoid the worst of the smoke. She grabbed a heavy blanket from his bed and began beating at the flames, trying to slow their progress. The fire was spreading along the wall where Timothy's television and gaming console were located. Apparently, an electrical problem had started the blaze while he was sleeping. The smoke was making it difficult to breathe, and his eyes were burning and watering. She knew she should leave, but she couldn't abandon Timothy. Instead, she wet several towels in the adjoining bathroom and placed them over Timothy's face to help filter the smoke. She also opened the windows to try to create some ventilation. In the distance, she could hear sirens approaching. The Riverside Hills Fire Department was known for their quick response times and professional service. She had complete confidence that they would be able to rescue Timothy and control the fire. All she had to do was keep him safe until they arrived. The first fire truck arrived within 8 minutes of her call. Could hear the firefighters entering the house and calling out instructions to each other. She leaned out the window and waved to get their attention. Up here, she shouted. 3rd floor, front bedroom, there's a boy inside. 2 firefighters immediately began climbing the ladder truck to reach the 3rd floor window. Felt a tremendous sense of relief. These were professionals with years of training and the best equipment available. They would know exactly what to do. But as the first firefighter reached the window and looked inside, his expression changed. The fire had spread much more rapidly than expected, and the room was now almost completely engulfed in flames. The smoke was so thick that visibility was nearly zero. Ma'am, you need to get out now, the firefighter shouted. We'll take care of the boy. Reluctantly moved away from Timothy and allowed the firefighter to help her out the window and down the ladder. From the safety of the lawn, she watched as more firefighters arrived and began their rescue efforts. 10 firefighters in total were now working on the scene, some fighting the fire, others attempting to reach Timothy. The problem was that the fire had created a dangerous situation in the room's structure. The intense heat had weakened the floor joists, and there was concern that the entire section of the house might collapse. The firefighters couldn't safely enter the room with their heavy equipment and protective gear. They tried several approaches. 2 firefighters attempted to enter through the bedroom door, but the hallway was now blocked by fallen debris. Others tried to reach Timothy through the window using extension ladders, but the angle was too difficult, and the room was too hot for them to get close enough. The fire chief, a 25-year veteran named Captain, was visibly frustrated. He had seen many difficult rescues in his career, but this situation was particularly challenging. The fire was spreading faster than they could control it, and every minute that passed made Timothy's chances of survival smaller. We need to try a different approach, Captain told his team. The aerial ladder isn't working, and we can't get through the interior. What about cutting through the wall from the adjacent room? The firefighters began setting up equipment to cut through the wall, but this process would take precious minutes that Timothy might not have. Watched from the lawn, her heart breaking as she realized that even these brave, skilled professionals might not be able to save the boy she had come to love like her own son. The media had begun to arrive, drawn by the dramatic scene of a billionaire's mansion on fire. News vans lined the street, and reporters were setting up cameras to capture the rescue efforts. The family's wealth and prominence made this a high-profile incident that would be covered extensively in the local and national news. Richard arrived just as the firefighters were making their wall-cutting attempt. He had been in a board meeting when his assistant received a call from the fire department. The look of anguish on his face as he realized his son was trapped inside was something would never forget. Despite his wealth and power, he was helpless in this situation, just another father watching his child in mortal danger. "Can't they get him out?" Richard asked Captain desperately. "I'll pay anything. I'll donate whatever the department needs. Just please save my son." Captain explained the technical challenges they were facing. The fire had created structural instability that made a standard rescue extremely dangerous. They were doing everything possible, but the situation was unlike anything they had encountered before. As the minutes ticked by, the fire continued to spread. Other parts of the house were now beginning to catch fire, and the firefighters had to split their efforts between rescue and containment. The mansion's size and complex layout were working against them, creating multiple challenges that they couldn't address simultaneously with their available personnel. Stood on the lawn, feeling helpless as she watched the professionals struggle with the rescue. She had worked in this house for 12 years. She knew every room, every hallway, every quirk of the building's layout. She understood how the air flowed through the structure and where the weak points were located. More importantly, she knew Timothy. She knew that he was a deep sleeper who could sleep through almost anything. She knew that he was claustrophobic and would panic if he woke up in a confined space. She knew that he had been fighting a cold for the past week and that his breathing might be compromised even before the smoke inhalation. As she watched the firefighters work, an idea began forming in her mind. It was crazy, probably dangerous, and certainly not something she was trained to do. But she also knew that conventional approaches weren't working and time was running out for Timothy. The house had a secret passage that connected Timothy's room to the library on the second floor. It had been built during the home's original construction as a novelty feature, something the original owner thought would be fun for his children. Timothy had shown it to years ago, swearing her to secrecy because his parents thought it was too dangerous and had forbidden him to use it. The passage was narrow and hadn't been maintained in years, but it might provide access to Timothy's room that the firefighters couldn't achieve through conventional means. Knew exactly where it was and how to access it. More importantly, she was small enough to fit through spaces that would be impossible for a fully equipped firefighter. As she considered this option, thought about her own children, and she had worked hard her entire life to provide for them and to set a good example. She had taught them to help others when they could and to never give up in the face of adversity. Now she was facing a situation where she might be the only person who could save Timothy's life. The decision wasn't easy. She could be hurt or killed if she attempted the rescue herself. She had no training in firefighting or emergency rescue. She didn't have protective equipment or breathing apparatus. But she also couldn't stand by and watch Timothy die when she might be able to help. Approached Captain with her idea. At first, he was adamant that she not attempt anything dangerous. It was against protocol to allow civilians to participate in rescue operations, and he couldn't risk having 2 people to rescue instead of 1. But as the firefighters' efforts continued to be unsuccessful, and as the fire continued to spread, became more insistent, she explained about the secret passage and her knowledge of the house layout. She pointed out that their current approaches weren't working and that Timothy's time was running out. "I've been in that house nearly every day for 12 years, she told the fire chief. "I know it better than anyone. That boy is like my own son. I can't just stand here and watch him die when I might be able to help." Captain was torn between his responsibility to keep civilians safe and his recognition that might be Timothy's only hope. The fire had now been burning for over an hour, and their traditional rescue methods had all failed. He could see the desperation in Richard's eyes and knew that they were running out of options. Richard, who had been listening to the conversation, made the decision for everyone. Despite his wealth and status, he had no expertise in firefighting or rescue operations. He had to trust the judgment of the professionals and anyone else who might be able to save his son. "Please," he said if you think you can help Timothy, I'm begging you to try. I know it's dangerous, but he's all I have. I can't lose him." The weight of that responsibility settled on shoulders like a heavy blanket. She thought about her own children and how she would feel if they were in Timothy's situation. She thought about the boy who had shared his hopes and dreams with her over the years, who had always treated her with kindness and respect. She also thought about her faith, had been raised in a small Baptist church where she learned that sometimes God puts you in a position where you can help others, and it's your responsibility to act. She believed that her knowledge of the house and her relationship with Timothy weren't just coincidences. They were part of a larger plan. "I'll need a flashlight," she told Captain, "and maybe a rope in case I need to pull him out. But I think I can get to him through the passage and bring him to safety." The fire chief reluctantly agreed to let her attempt the rescue, but only under strict conditions. She would have radio contact with the team outside. If the situation became too dangerous, she would abort the mission immediately. And she would have firefighters standing by to assist if she was able to reach Timothy. Accepted these conditions and began preparing for what might be the most important action of her life. She had no way of knowing that her decision would not only save Timothy's life, but would also change the way the entire community thought about heroism, courage, and the value of human life, regardless of social status or economic position. As she prepared to enter the house through the library entrance, offered a silent prayer for strength and wisdom. She thought about Timothy's smile and his dreams of studying veterinary medicine in college. She thought about the conversations they had shared about life and family and the importance of treating everyone with respect. Most of all, she thought about the simple truth that had guided her entire life. When someone needs help, you help them if you can, regardless of the cost or the risk. It was a principle that had shaped her approach to raising her own children, and now it would guide her in the most dangerous situation she had ever faced. The secret passage awaited, and Timothy's life hung in the balance. Washington, a 53-year-old housekeeper with no formal training in emergency rescue, was about to take a deep breath and step through the library's French doors into the smoky interior of the mansion. The library, normally a peaceful sanctuary filled with leather-bound books and comfortable reading chairs, now felt like stepping into another world. Smoke hung in the air like a gray fog, and the smell of burning materials grew stronger with each step. She took toward the hidden panel that concealed the secret passage. Captain's voice crackled through the small radio clipped to her shirt. "Can you hear me clearly? Remember, if conditions become unsafe, you retreat immediately." "I hear you loud and clear," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm at the library entrance to the passage now." The secret passage entrance was hidden behind a bookshelf that looked exactly like all the others lining the library walls. Ran her hand along the familiar wooden frame until she found the small lever that Timothy had shown her years ago. When she pressed it, the bookshelf swung inward with a soft click, revealing a narrow opening that led into darkness. The passage was even smaller than she remembered. It had been designed for children, not adults, and even its modest frame would be challenged by the tight space. The passage angled upward through the space between the house's thick walls, emerging near Timothy's closet on the third floor. It was essentially a wooden tunnel, roughly 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, with a small ladder at the steepest section. Clicked on her flashlight and aimed the beam into the passage. The wooden walls looked solid enough, though she could see dust and cobwebs that indicated no one had used this route in many years. More concerning was the fact that she could already feel heat radiating from somewhere above her, suggesting that the fire was affecting the areas around the passage. "I'm entering the passage now," she reported into her radio. "It's tight, but I think I can make it through." As she crawled into the narrow space, her mind went back to her childhood in rural Alabama. She had grown up in a small farmhouse with 6 brothers and sisters, where space was always at a premium. She remembered crawling under porches to retrieve lost toys and squeezing into tight spaces to help with repairs around the property. Those childhood experiences had taught her not to panic in confined spaces, a skill that was proving invaluable now. The passage was pitch black except for her flashlight beam, and the air was growing warmer as she climbed higher. She could hear the sounds of the fire somewhere above her, a crackling, roaring sound that seemed to grow louder with each foot she advanced. But she could also hear something else that made her heart race with hope. Timothy's alarm clock was still beeping in his room, which meant the electrical system in that area hadn't completely failed yet. The first section of the passage was relatively easy to navigate, despite the cramped quarters. Crawled on her hands and knees, pushing her flashlight ahead of her to illuminate the path. The wooden walls were warm to the touch but not dangerously hot. She could feel her heart pounding from the physical exertion and the stress of the situation, but she forced herself to maintain a steady pace. About halfway through the passage, she reached the ladder section that led to the 3rd floor. This was the most challenging part of the route, requiring her to climb almost vertically for about 8 feet while staying within the narrow confines of the passage. As she began to climb, The heat became much more intense, and she could smell smoke beginning to seep into the passage itself. "What's your status?" Captain's voice came through the radio, sounding concerned. "I'm at the ladder section," she replied, slightly out of breath. "It's getting hotter, but I'm still making progress. I should reach Timothy's room in a few more minutes." Outside the mansion, the scene had become even more chaotic. Additional fire trucks had arrived as the blaze continued to spread to other parts of the house. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live coverage of the rescue attempt to viewers around the world. The story of a wealthy family's house fire had captured public attention, but now it was becoming something much more significant. A story about an unlikely hero risking her life to save someone else's child. Richard stood on the lawn, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face streaked with soot from getting too close to the building. He clutched his cell phone, waiting for any word about his son's condition. Was on a plane flying back from Europe, but she wouldn't arrive for several more hours. Richard felt completely helpless, a feeling he hadn't experienced since building his first company from nothing 30 years ago. The firefighters continued their efforts to contain the blaze and provide backup support for rescue attempt. They had positioned a ladder at Timothy's window and were standing by with medical equipment in case she was successful in reaching him. Captain coordinated the operation from the ground, monitoring multiple radio channels and directing resources where they were needed most. Inside the passage, had reached the top of the ladder and was now crawling through the final section that led to Timothy's room. The heat was almost unbearable here, and she could see wisps of smoke beginning to curl through gaps in the wooden walls. The passage was obviously not designed to withstand the kind of temperatures generated by a serious house fire, and she worried about how long it would remain structurally sound. The exit point into Timothy's room was concealed behind a panel in his walk-in closet. Had to feel along the wall with her hands to locate the release mechanism while trying to ignore the increasingly dangerous conditions around her. The air was so hot that it hurt to breathe, and sweat was pouring down her face despite the relatively short time she had been inside the passage. Finally, her fingers found the familiar lever that opened the panel. She pressed it and felt the wall section swing away, revealing Timothy's closet. But as the panel opened, a wave of superheated air and thick smoke poured into the passage, nearly overwhelming her. The fire had advanced much further than she had expected, and Timothy's room was now in serious danger of becoming completely engulfed. "I'm in his closet," reported through her radio, coughing as she spoke. "The conditions are very bad up here. I can see the fire spreading along the far wall." She crawled out of the passage and into the closet, staying low to avoid the worst of the smoke. Through the open closet door, she could see Timothy's room, and the sight made her heart sink. The fire had spread from the original wall to include most of the ceiling and was beginning to move toward the bed where Timothy lay unconscious. The young man appeared to be breathing, but barely. His face was pale, and she could see that he was suffering from serious smoke inhalation. The towels she had placed over his face earlier had helped somewhat, but they were now dry and ineffective. She knew that she had only minutes to get him out before the room became completely uninhabitable. His first challenge was reaching Timothy. The direct path from the closet to the bed was now blocked by falling debris and active flames. She would have to find another route, staying close to the floor and moving quickly to avoid the worst of the heat and smoke. She took off her shirt and tied it around her nose and mouth as a makeshift filter, then began crawling toward Timothy's bed. The carpet was hot against her hands and knees, and she could feel the intense heat from the fire even at floor level. Pieces of burning material were falling from the ceiling, and she had to dodge several near misses as she made her way across the room. When she reached Timothy, was relieved to see that he was still breathing, though his respirations were shallow and labored. His skin was warm to the touch, but not burned. The main threats to his life were smoke inhalation and the rapidly worsening conditions in the room. "Timothy, honey, can you hear me?" she said loudly, shaking his shoulder gently. I need you to wake up." There was no response. Timothy was deeply unconscious, probably from a combination of smoke inhalation and the medications he had been taking for his cold. Knew that she couldn't carry him, he was simply too big and heavy for her to lift. She would have to find another way to get him to safety. Looking around the room, spotted Timothy's desk chair, a heavy leather chair on wheels that might serve as a makeshift stretcher. Fighting through the smoke and heat, she managed to push the chair over to the bed. With tremendous effort, she was able to roll Timothy off the bed and onto the chair, positioning him so that his head was supported and his airway was clear. The journey back to the closet was the most dangerous part of the entire rescue. Had to push the heavy chair across a floor that was increasingly unstable due to the fire damage. The wheels caught on pieces of debris, and she had to constantly adjust course to avoid areas where the ceiling was collapsing. Halfway back to the closet, a large section of burning ceiling material crashed down just inches from where they were moving. The impact sent sparks and embers flying throughout the room and felt the heat singe her arms and back. But she kept pushing the chair forward, driven by determination and the knowledge that stopping meant death for both of them. "Report your status immediately," Captain's voice was urgent through the radio. "Our thermal imaging shows that section of the house is approaching critical temperature levels." "I have Timothy," replied, breathing heavily. "We're moving toward the exit, but it's slow going. The conditions up here are getting very dangerous." "If you can't make it out safely, we'll have to try to reach you from the outside," the fire chief replied. "Don't take any unnecessary risks." But knew that there was no safe option at this point. The outside approach had already failed, and the fire was spreading too rapidly to wait for another rescue attempt. Their only chance was to make it back through the secret passage before the entire structure became unstable. When she reached the closet, faced her biggest challenge yet. Timothy was unconscious and couldn't help with the transfer into the passage. The opening was small, and the chair wouldn't fit through. She would have to somehow get him through the opening and down the passage on her own. Thought quickly about her options. The passage was too narrow for her to carry Timothy in any conventional sense, but it might be possible to drag him through if she could position herself correctly. She opened the passage panel fully and arranged Timothy so that his head and shoulders were inside the opening. Working as quickly as possible, climbed into the passage ahead of Timothy and began pulling him through by his arms. It was exhausting work, made even more difficult by the heat and smoke. She had to stop frequently to rest and to check that Timothy was still breathing. Several times she worried that she might be hurting him by dragging him across the rough wooden floor of the passage, but she knew it was better than leaving him in the burning room. The descent down the ladder section was particularly challenging. Had to support Timothy's weight while backing down the ladder herself, essentially carrying him down one rung at a time. Her arms and shoulders ached from the effort, and she was becoming lightheaded from the smoke and heat. But the thought of Timothy's family and her promise to bring him to safety kept her moving forward. As they reached the lower section of the passage, the air began to improve slightly. Could feel cooler air flowing up from the library, and the smoke was less dense. She allowed herself a moment of hope that they might actually make it to safety. But just as she was beginning to feel confident about their escape, she heard a sound that chilled her blood, a loud cracking noise from somewhere above them in the passage. The fire had apparently reached the area around the secret tunnel, and the wooden structure was beginning to fail under the extreme heat. "The passage is starting to give way," reported into her radio. "We need to move faster." She redoubled her efforts to pull Timothy through the remaining section of the tunnel. Behind them, she could hear more cracking and groaning as the wooden supports began to weaken. A few pieces of debris fell around them, and realized that they were in a race against time to reach the library before the entire passage collapsed. The final 50 feet felt like 50 miles. Strength was nearly exhausted, and Timothy seemed to be getting heavier with each foot they traveled. Her hands were raw from gripping his arms and pulling him across the rough wooden floor. Sweat and tears streamed down her face as she fought against exhaustion and fear. But finally, after what felt like hours but was actually less than 30 minutes, saw the opening into the library ahead of them. Cool, relatively clean air was flowing through the gap, and she could hear voices calling her name from the other side. With one final surge of effort, pulled Timothy through the opening and into the library. Immediately, firefighters who had been waiting on the other side took over, lifting Timothy onto a stretcher and beginning emergency medical treatment. Collapsed against the bookshelf, gasping for clean air and feeling the overwhelming relief of having completed the rescue. "You did it," Captain said, kneeling beside her. "You actually got him out. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." But attention was focused entirely on Timothy. The paramedics were working on him with oxygen and other medical equipment, and she could see that he was beginning to show signs of consciousness. His eyelids were fluttering, and his breathing was becoming stronger and more regular. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked the lead paramedic. He's got some smoke inhalation and he's dehydrated from the heat, but his vital signs are stabilizing, the medic replied. You got him out just in time. A few more minutes in there and we might have lost him. As the paramedics prepared to transport Timothy to the hospital, he opened his eyes and looked around groggily. When he saw sitting nearby, a weak smile crossed his face. T whispered, "What happened? Where am I?" "You're safe now, honey," replied, taking his hand. "There was a fire in your room, but you're going to be fine." Timothy's eyes widened as the memory of the morning began to come back to him. The fire! I remember going to sleep with music playing, and then I woke up and couldn't breathe. Everything was so hot and smoky. "Don't worry about that now," said gently. "The important thing is that you're alive and safe. Your father is outside waiting to see you." As the paramedics wheeled Timothy toward the ambulance, Richard rushed to his son's side. The relief on his face was evident as he saw Timothy conscious and alert. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he gripped his son's hand. "I thought I had lost you," Richard said. "I don't know how to thank. She risked her life to save you." Timothy looked over at who was being checked by another paramedic for smoke inhalation and minor burns. "She's always been like family to us," he said weakly. "I'm not surprised she would do something like this. She's the bravest person I know." As the ambulance pulled away with Timothy and his father inside, finally allowed herself to think about what had just happened. She had entered a burning building, navigated through a dangerous passage, and rescued an unconscious person from a room that was rapidly becoming uninhabitable. She had accomplished something that trained professionals with specialized equipment had been unable to do. But as she sat in the back of another ambulance receiving treatment for her own injuries, didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had simply done what needed to be done. In her mind, there had never been any question about whether to attempt the rescue. Timothy needed help. She was in a position to provide it, and that was all that mattered. The fire department continued working for several more hours to fully extinguish the blaze and prevent it from spreading to other parts of the mansion. The damage was extensive, particularly to the third floor where Timothy's room had been located. The investigation would later reveal that an electrical fault in Timothy's gaming console had started the fire while he slept. As word of the rescue spread, media attention intensified. Reporters wanted to interview about her heroic actions, and the story began to take on a life of its own. The narrative of a humble housekeeper saving a billionaire's son captured the public imagination and prompted discussions about courage, class, and the true meaning of heroism. But for the most important outcome was simply that Timothy was alive and recovering. The rest, the media attention, the praise, the recognition, was secondary to the knowledge that the weeks following the rescue were unlike anything Washington had ever experienced in her 53 years of life. What had started as a normal workday had transformed into a media sensation that reached far beyond the quiet neighborhood of Riverside Hills. Her simple act of courage had touched something deep in the public consciousness, sparking conversations about heroism, social class, and what it truly means to care for one another. Timothy spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from smoke inhalation and dehydration. Visited him every day, bringing homemade soup and the kind of caring attention that no amount of money could buy. Despite his ordeal, Timothy's spirits remained high, and he was especially eager to hear the details of how it managed to reach him through the secret passage. "I can't believe you remembered that old tunnel," Timothy said during one of her visits. "I haven't used it since I was maybe 12 years old. I didn't even think about it when the fire started." Smiled as she adjusted his pillows. "I remember everything about that house, honey. I've spent so many years taking care of it and taking care of you. That passage might have been forgotten by everyone else, but I knew it was there when you needed it most." The doctors had initially been concerned about potential long-term effects from Timothy's smoke exposure, but his youth and generally good health worked in his favor. His lungs cleared quickly, and within a week of the incident, he was back to his normal activities. However, the experience had changed him in ways that would become apparent over time. Richard struggled with how to express his gratitude, too. In his business world, problems were typically solved with money, contracts, and strategic planning. But this situation was different. Had risked her life to save his son, and no amount of compensation could truly reflect the value of that gift. His first instinct was to offer a substantial financial reward. When he suggested this, however, politely declined anything beyond her normal salary and a small bonus to cover her medical expenses from the rescue. "Mister, I didn't save Timothy for money," she explained. "I saved him because he's like family to me, and that's what families do for each other. You don't need to pay extra for that." Richard found himself humbled by his response. In his world of high-stakes business dealings, people rarely acted without expecting something in return. Selflessness was a reminder of values he had once held but had perhaps forgotten in his pursuit of wealth and success. His reaction when she returned from Europe was even more emotional. She had missed the entire crisis, learning about it only when Richard called her from the hospital. The thought that she could have lost her son while she was away on a business trip that suddenly seemed trivial had shaken her deeply. When finally met with to thank her personally, both women were moved to tears. Who had always been friendly with but perhaps hadn't fully appreciated her dedication to the family, now saw her in a completely different light. "I don't know how to begin to thank you," said, her voice breaking. "You gave me back my son, you gave us back our future. I will never forget what you did for our family." The media attention surrounding the rescue was intense but complicated. News outlets from around the world picked up the story, and it quickly became more than just a local interest piece. The narrative of a black housekeeper risking her life to save the son of a white billionaire family touched on sensitive issues of race, class, and social justice that resonated with audiences everywhere. Some reporters tried to frame the story as an example of how working-class people are expected to sacrifice for their wealthy employers. Others focused on the racial dynamics, suggesting that heroism highlighted the ongoing inequalities in American society. These interpretations frustrated who felt they missed the point entirely. "It wasn't about black or white, rich or poor," told one persistent reporter. "It was about a young man who needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. That's all. If it had been any other child in that situation, I would have done the same thing." His own children were immensely proud of their mother's actions, though they also worried about her safety. Her eldest daughter, Sandra, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital, understood better than most how dangerous the rescue had been. "Mama, we're all proud of what you did," Sandra told her. "But promise me you won't take risks like that again. We need you to be safe and healthy. Timothy's family isn't the only one who depends on you." Son Michael, who worked as a mechanic, had a different perspective. He had always admired his mother's work ethic and caring nature, but the rescue had elevated her to hero status in his eyes. He began telling the story to anyone who would listen, proud to be the son of someone who had accomplished something so remarkable. The fire department's investigation into the incident revealed several important findings. The electrical fault that started the fire was traced to a defective power strip that Timothy had been using for his gaming equipment. The rapid spread of the fire was attributed to synthetic materials in the room that burned more quickly than traditional furnishings. More significantly for future emergency response, the investigation highlighted the importance of local knowledge in rescue operations. Captain included a detailed report about its use of the secret passage, recommending that fire departments develop better procedures for gathering information about building layouts and unique features during emergency situations. "In 30 years of firefighting, I had never encountered a situation where a civilian's knowledge of a building proved to be the key to a successful rescue," Captain wrote in his report. "This incident demonstrates the value of considering all available resources and information sources during emergency operations." The Riverside Hills Fire Department used the house fire as a case study for training purposes, was invited to speak to groups of firefighters about her experience, sharing insights that helped them understand how non-professionals might contribute to rescue efforts in certain circumstances. These speaking engagements were initially uncomfortable for who had never seen herself as a public speaker, but she gradually came to appreciate the opportunity to help improve emergency response procedures that might save other lives in the future. The mansion required extensive renovation to repair the fire damage. The third floor was completely rebuilt, and the entire house was updated with state-of-the-art fire suppression and detection systems. Richard spared no expense in making the home as safe as possible, determined that his family would never again face such a dangerous situation. Interestingly, when the house was rebuilt, Richard made sure that the secret passage was preserved and improved. He had it expanded slightly and equipped with emergency lighting and communication equipment. transforming it from a children's novelty into a genuine emergency escape route. "Saved my son's life using this passage," he explained to the contractors. "I want to make sure it's available if anyone ever needs it again, and I want it to be as safe as possible." The most significant long-term change, however, was in the relationship between and the family. What had already been a respectful and caring working relationship evolved into something much deeper and more meaningful. Timothy, in particular, was profoundly affected by sacrifice on his behalf. The experience had forced him to confront his own mortality and to think seriously about what mattered most in life. He began spending more time with, asking about her life experiences and her philosophy about service to others. "Why did you risk your life for me?" he asked her one day as they sat in the rebuilt kitchen. "I mean, I know you care about me, but you could have been killed. You have your own family to think about." Consider the question carefully before answering. Timothy, when you care about someone, you don't think about the risks. You just think about what needs to be done. I've been part of your life since you were 5 years old. I've watched you grow up, helped take care of you when you were sick, celebrated your successes. You're not just my employer's son, you're like my own child. This conversation prompted Timothy to think more deeply about the people who had shaped his life. He realized that had been a constant, caring presence throughout his childhood, often providing emotional support and guidance that complemented what he received from his parents. As Timothy prepared for his senior year of high school and began thinking about college, he found himself drawn to careers focused on helping others. His original plan to study business like his father no longer seemed as appealing. Instead, he became interested in emergency medicine and disaster response, inspired partly by his own experience and partly by his example of selfless service. The annual Employee Appreciation Dinner at Industries took on special significance that year. Richard used the occasion to publicly recognize heroism in front of all his employees and their families. He presented her with a crystal award engraved with the words, "True Hero, Washington," and announced the establishment of the Washington Scholarship Fund for children of company employees. "Washington embodies the very best of human nature," Richard told the assembled crowd. "Her courage, compassion, and selflessness saved my son's life and reminded all of us what really matters. This scholarship fund will help other young people pursue their dreams, just as helped ensure that my son can pursue his." Was deeply moved by the gesture, though she felt somewhat embarrassed by all the attention. She had always preferred to work quietly behind the scenes, and being the center of so much focus was uncomfortable for her. But she also recognized the opportunity to use the platform to highlight important values and to inspire others to help their communities. The scholarship fund grew rapidly as news of its establishment spread. Donations came not only from industry's employees and their families, but also from people around the world who had been inspired by story. Within 6 months, the fund had enough money to provide full college scholarships for several students each year. Was asked to serve on the Scholarship Selection Committee, a role that allowed her to meet and encourage young people from backgrounds similar to her own. She found this work deeply fulfilling, as it connected her heroic act to ongoing opportunities to make a positive difference in other people's lives. One of the first scholarship recipients was a young woman named Jessica Martinez, whose mother worked as a custodian at Industries. Jessica wanted to study fire science and emergency management, partly inspired by story. When met Jessica, she saw something of her own younger self, a determined young woman from a working-class family who was ready to work hard to achieve her goals. "Mrs. Washington, I want to help save lives like you did," Jessica told her. "Your story showed me that heroes come from all different backgrounds. I want to be prepared to help when someone needs it." Was touched by Jessica's dedication and became a mentor to her throughout her college years. Their relationship demonstrated how this moment of heroism had created ripple effects that would continue to influence lives for years to come. The fire also prompted changes in building codes and emergency response procedures throughout the region. The rapid spread of the blaze, despite the home's expensive construction, led to new requirements for fire suppression systems in large residential properties. Emergency response teams also developed new protocols for gathering detailed building information during crisis situations. Knowledge of the house layout had proven crucial to the rescue's success, but the fire department recognized that they couldn't rely on lucky coincidences for future emergencies. They began working with architects and building departments to create detailed emergency access plans for large properties in their coverage area. A year after the fire, Timothy graduated from high school as valedictorian of his class. His graduation speech focused on the importance of recognizing and appreciating the people who make a difference in our lives, often without seeking recognition or reward. "Last year, someone I've known my entire life saved my life," Timothy told his classmates and their families. "Washington risked everything to pull me out of a burning building when professional firefighters couldn't reach me. But in a way, she's been saving me my whole life, teaching me about kindness, responsibility, and caring for others through her example every single day." Timothy announced during his speech that he planned to study emergency medicine in college, with the goal of becoming a paramedic or emergency room doctor. He credited with showing him that the most important work involves helping people during their most vulnerable moments. Who attended Timothy's graduation as an honored guest of the family, was moved to tears by his speech. She had always been proud of Timothy's academic achievements, but seeing how their shared experience had inspired his life goals was deeply meaningful to her. The second anniversary of the fire was marked by a community service day organized by the family and supported by industries. Employees and their families volunteered at local schools, hospitals, and community centers, performing various service projects in honor. Herself spent the day working at a local elementary school, helping to paint classrooms and organize supplies. It felt good to return to the kind of quiet, helpful work that had always given her life meaning, away from the spotlight and recognition that still made her somewhat uncomfortable. As she worked alongside other volunteers, reflected on how much her life had changed since that August morning when she smelled smoke in the mansion. She had been honored by the mayor, featured in magazines, and invited to speak at conferences. But at her core, she remained the same person who had raised 5 children while working multiple jobs, who treated everyone with respect and kindness, and who believed in helping others whenever possible. The secret passage that had been the key to Timothy's rescue became something of a local legend. Tour groups that visited the rebuilt mansion were always curious about it, and several other families in the area discovered hidden passages in their own historic homes, prompting them to consider how these features might be used in emergency situations. Occasionally gave tour of the mansion to groups interested in fire safety and emergency preparedness. She found these educational visits rewarding, as they allowed her to share practical knowledge that might help prevent similar tragedies. Timothy completed his first year of college with excellent grades and continued to pursue his interest in emergency medicine. He spent his summers volunteering with local EMT services and fire departments, gaining hands-on experience in emergency response. His instructors noted his unusual combination of technical knowledge and genuine compassion for people in crisis situations. During one of his visits home, Timothy told about a call he had responded to where a child had been separated from his parents during a house fire. Timothy had stayed with the frightened boy, talking calmly and keeping him distracted while other responders worked to reunite the family. "I kept thinking about what you taught me," Timothy explained. "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is just be there for someone when they're scared and need to know they're not alone." Smiled, recognizing in Timothy's words the values she had tried to live by throughout her own life. The rescue had saved Timothy's life, but their relationship over the years had shaped his character in ways that would influence how he helped others for the rest of his life. As approached her 65th birthday, she began to think about retirement, though the family made it clear that she would always be welcome to continue working for them for as long as she wished. The financial security provided by the family's generosity and the scholarship fund had given her options she had never imagined possible. But's definition of retirement didn't involve sitting idle. She was exploring opportunities to work with organizations focused on fire safety education and emergency preparedness training, particularly in communities where people might not have access to the best resources and information. "I learned something important that day," reflected during an interview on the 5th anniversary of the rescue. "Sometimes ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, and they have to decide who they want to be in that moment. I'm grateful that I was able to help Timothy, but I also learned that each of us has the capacity to make a difference when it matters most." The Washington Scholarship Fund had by then provided college education for more than 20 young people, creating a lasting legacy that extended far beyond the dramatic events of a single day. Recipients were encouraged to pursue careers in public service, education, healthcare, and other fields focused on helping their communities. Took particular pride in following the careers of scholarship recipients like Jessica Martinez, who had become a fire department captain, and David, who used his scholarship to become a pediatric nurse. These young professionals carried forward the spirit of service that had motivated's rescue of Timothy, creating an ongoing cycle of positive impact. The family mansion stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal. The rebuilt structure incorporated the latest safety technology while preserving the character and history that made it special. The secret passage remained, updated and improved, serving as a reminder of how unexpected resources and knowledge could prove crucial in times of crisis. Most importantly, the relationships forged and strengthened by the fire continued to enrich the lives of everyone involved. Washington had saved Timothy's life through her courage and quick thinking, but the experience had created bonds that transcended social and economic differences, demonstrating that the most important human values, love, courage, and compassion, recognize no boundaries of class or race. Timothy often said that it saved more than his life that day. She had shown him what kind of person he wanted to become. And for her part, had learned that a single moment of courage could create ripples of positive change that would continue long after the initial heroic act was forgotten. The true measure of Washington's heroism wasn't just in her willingness to risk her life for someone else's child, but in the way that single act of courage inspired countless others to think differently about service, sacrifice, and what it means to care for one another in a complex and often divided world. Young man with his whole life ahead of him would be able to continue pursuing his dreams because she had been willing to take a risk when it mattered most, something that 10 professional firefighters had been unable to accomplish. Her journey into that burning house would become a story of courage and determination that would be remembered long after the last ember had been extinguished.